Okay, we are live. I'll call to order this meeting of the joint ER9 Policy Committee at 9 o'clock. Members in attendance, Chris Parkin and John Stinson.
Good morning. I call to order this meeting of the Region 9 Policy Committee at 9:01 this morning. Members in attendance are myself, Sarah Lieberger, Kathy Thompson, and Cheryl Graziano.
First item is the approval of minutes. Anything for the joint policy committee?
No objection.
Very good. Hearing no objections, we'll consider the minutes passed.
On Region 9, do we have any thoughts or additions to the minutes or anything else? No objections? Okay, minutes passed on our end as well.
Awesome. That will take us into committee member comments. Hearing none in joint, we'll pass it to Sarah.
Region 9, do we have any committee member comments?
Well, I think given our Region 9 meeting last week, do we want to discuss that now? Just to share with everybody what the discussion was.
I think so as a function of the protocols for a meeting, committee member comment or public comment isn't, according to Robert's rules, isn't a sort of place where you can do discussion.
Okay.
But if the topic that you want to raise relates to agenda items, or we could add, well, actually you can't add agenda items because this is a special meeting for you. But if it pertains to things on the agenda, for instance, model policy review process, or the specifics of the 1, 2, and 3,000 series, then it's fair game for discussion there. Would that work?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Kathy, you're thinking A, right? The context would be referring to the agenda item and process.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Sarah, you're in agreement with that as well, right? Okay.
Agree, sure. Good morning, Stephanie.
Morning, Stephanie.
Hey, Stephanie.
Okay. And I think
I'm actually, you're live. Okay, I'll send a note to you, John.
Okay. Then hearing no additional committee member comment, we'll move on. And I'm sorry, we didn't stop for public comment. I'll make a note. We didn't stop and just say no members of the public being in attendance. We'll move on from there. So apologies for that. That takes us to 5, discussion of possible action. 5A is model policy review process. So I have a few items that I'd love to touch on, but I think Kathy had something she wanted to jump into first.
Well, and Sarah and Cheryl jump in as well. We had at our Region 9 meeting was it Tuesday already? Tuesday night, we had a significant discussion around this process. And I don't know if the Easton and Reading board members or you all as chairs of the policy committee are aware of a motion that the Region 9 board passed a month or so ago around this process. So I'll read it just so everybody is aware of what was the motion that was approved by the Region 9 board. The motion moved that the Region 9 Board of Education direct the superintendent of schools to create a working draft rubric of policy recommendation for consideration of a transition to Shipman and Goodwin model policies. Approved 6-0, so unanimous approval. And when Sarah gave her committee update at the meeting, it raised questions around, are we being true to that motion on behalf of Region 9? There seemed to be it wasn't clear with everybody what the process was going to be. So, and there was a significant discussion, and I think in the context of this committee meeting, we should share those thoughts. I think Sarah and Cheryl, please jump in. My feeling was that there seems to be a lack of clarity, perhaps, around what exactly that motion meant to be, whether and the involvement that Dr. McKinnon, who's cited in this motion, what his role was going to be in developing the rubric. So the discussion was around the committee going forward, reviewing the policies and making recommendations as to what should stay, leave, or be modified, versus Dr. McKinnon taking the lead in that process. There was also an issue raised about the timing of this process, because I believe there are concerns around there needs to be a timely resolution to getting this finished up, because evidently it sounds like it's been a very long process, and there have been several iterations of policies that were going to be used. So the third piece, and this is just a brief summary, but the third piece was have Easton and Reading also made a similar motion, and have your boards approved the use of the Shipman and Goodwin model policies.
Yep.
So those were I think
that's super helpful.
Cheryl and Sarah, correct me if I missed anything or if that's not the same understanding you had, but those were the three overarching issues that were discussed at the meeting this past week.
And I'm also familiar with the sort of discussion that took place. I try to stay tuned in. So I can say, so I'll try to, I guess I can do them most easily in reverse order, just because that's how I'm remembering them. So Easton has not, I don't believe Reading has approved the use of Shipman as model. That's not something that normally would happen. It's, I would say, abnormal for that to happen. It would be normal if there was a financial component involved. It was, $20,000 to use these, but because it's no cost to us, and because we've actually been talking about this since, going back to October, November, I've been telling my board about this and heard no resistance during our board meetings. That said, it actually touches on a really important component that I know we touched on last week, and that is, how do we, we're going to go do our homework, we're going to do all this work. How do we bring our boards along with us, and how do we make sure that we're not having to relitigate all of this stuff again and again and again? Mm-hmm. And so much of it is tied to the presentation that we give to the boards. And I think we've talked about having a Shipman and Goodwin attorney join us for that conversation to make sure that we have this sort of level playing field and understanding of here's what this is and why it's important that we sort of make the shift. I think that also relates to the timeline. So I did some work, and that was the main thing I wanted to talk about in terms of process, is I did some work in the spreadsheet to just sort of game out how many pages a week would we be, sort of trying to digest and trying to get to if we were going for, I think we talked about the May 24th tri-board is a great opportunity if we can get, to the point where we're all three there and we're all three saying, hey, we're ready to approve, these policies. That would be amazing. In order for that to work, I need about a month before that for my board to do first reading and sort of look at these things. So I'm hoping, and I know this may be crazy, and everyone can say that's crazy, we can't hit that timeline, but I would love to be able to do mid-April for that. We've gone through, and now I can sort of give this all to my board and say, look, I've looked through all these things. Now I want to help you all to look through these things and sort of give them access and make sure that they're going through. But it's aggressive. It basically, last week we had 58 pages that we were to review. It basically doubles that, and sometimes a little bit more. It goes from 60 pages a week to 120 to 150 pages a week. Mm-hmm. And I've sort of gamed that out. That would sort of get us that we all have reviewed over the course of essentially the next 5 weeks or so. The first item you mentioned
was really just clarity on our Region 9 board around that motion. Is that what we're working towards? It's sort of an order of operations question, I think, because there were some on the board who felt that Dr. McKinnon should really be leading the discussion around which policies we should be reviewing versus we're kind of doing the flip, it seems. So I think that was a part of the discussion.
So I think there is confusion, and the motion that you read specifically cites that he would develop a rubric, right? And a rubric by definition is a sort of system for evaluation, right? So it was not what we would evaluate. I think he's been really clear, like, you guys need to look at all these policies. We cannot just approve all these policies sight unseen. Like, we have to read them all. And that's the process that we're going through now. I think his rubric was essentially, it was originally the, what was it? Revise, adopt.
Yeah.
So, I can't remember that,
Adopt,
but
repeal,
right.
revise, I think.
But last week, I think he is a big buyer of this spreadsheet for coordinating our efforts and driving us through makes a lot of sense. And therefore it's adopt, reject, revise becomes the sort of question on each one of the shipment policies. And then there's a sort of secondary review that he is recommending, that he recommended last week, which would be then and do that, approve all these shipment policies as much as humanly possible, take all of them, and then do a second round after that where you look to sort of resuscitate any policies that you would have removed by way of adopting the shipment policies. So that was his recommendation. I agree with his recommendation. I would like to follow that if we can all agree.
Yeah, I mean, speaking for myself only here, I'm not familiar with the CABE policies. That it sounds like a lot of time was spent reviewing them, and they were complex in some ways. My view, based on the last few weeks of these policies, seem very straightforward and very simple to read. I mean, yes, it was 58 pages, but many of those pages were regulations or an appendix or a form, and they seem simple. So I don't have a point of comparison versus CABE, but I do think it's very manageable to get through these. And it sounds like those who have dealt with CABE agree that this is completely manageable. And I think if we feel that there is a significant desire on the part of Region 9 that we get to a first reading by, I think the date is April 26th, and then a second reading in May date. I think if everybody agrees that that's doable, I think that's great. I think that's great, and I think it will address the concerns to the big, I think significantly address the concerns that were raised at the Region 9 Board of Ed meeting the other day. To me, the hard part isn't the reading of the policies. The hard part is that once we've read them all and we understand what we've got, then when we look at what we would be eliminating from our current policy manual, because there isn't, as we've discussed, there's not a side-by-side. And I think that's where, like, Dr. Pearson-Ugal and Dr. McKinnon's expertise comes in. That's where, at least for me, I need their input, because I don't feel comfortable saying, well, we can shed those, but we need to keep those. So in my head, when I think through the process, I think, okay, we go through all these policies, we have questions. I think most of them are fairly minor, I think, should be. Yeah. And then we say, okay, we're good with all of this. We've addressed these questions, but now Dr. Pearson-Ugal and Dr. McKinnon, based on our current policy handbooks, advise us with legal counsel as needed, what you feel we can shed and what we need to keep. And then we're in good shape. And we will end up, I think we have to end up with 3 individual manuals. We cannot have one because we are 3 separate boards. So we have to have our own. We can't have a tri-district manual, is my understanding. We need to have a Region 9, a Reading, and an Easton. Is that?
I guess the one thing I'll add to that, Kathy, and I do agree that the process that you outlined with respect to however one would interpret the motion that Region 9 passed, which full disclosure to those who didn't attend, right? To Kathy's point, those questions were raised, but not to the degree where there was consensus among Region 9 to amend the motion or clarify the motion or advance a new motion. So we did discuss whether or not we should reintroduce to the agenda a new motion to make to change or provide more prescriptive direction to the policy committee. So that was tabled. And I think what Kathy suggests is really ultimately, which Jason emphasized in the context of our discussion, is really a nice solution to really what the end goal should be, is to have an efficient process where, we're taking advisement from Jason and Stephanie respectively. And then, the outcome, I think the one thing I'll add, Kathy, absolutely legally, right? These are 3 different districts. But what I did hear clearly, even though there wasn't more consensus across for the Region 9 board on the other day, is that we don't want, say, for example, a policy that can be consistent throughout 3 districts to have different wording. So in other words, let's just use, I'm using the 1,000 series pool. Or let's pick something that would be easy, right? No, the firearms policy.
Well, I mean,
There's no reason for that to deviate among we have to have 3 different policies, agreed, but the wording should, unless there's something that's specific to a particular building, the objective I thought I understood was that should be the same wording throughout. And you just say, Easton, Reading, Region 9, but you have to have 3 separate books, if you will. But then where it could deviate perhaps is baseline pool, right? That could be pool or the pool safety may not be applicable for K through 8. And thus that could only be a policy for Region 9. So that's kind of where, but alignment, I understood the alignment to be the same from a baseline, right?
And I would say, I think that Dr. McKinnon has made it really clear, and this has been the desire of every superintendent, all 3 that I've dealt with, is that it is highly beneficial for the administration of these schools that are all sort of centralized in central office, that there be one set of language. Now, we don't have an aquatics program at Helen Keller, but if next week we say, let's do that, let's get a club, is there any harm in us having that policy? No. So I intend to recommend to the Easton board that we adopt the pool safety plan, as a function of policy. So the question becomes, is there any harm in us having this policy? Is there any harm in saying, K through 12? Is there a benefit in sort of specifically carving out and saying just 9th through 12th graders? I don't think so, but ultimately, I think when it comes to those questions, we should defer to Dr. McKinnon, and we should defer to the attorneys at Shipman and Goodwin.
All right. So it sounds like if everybody can live with this timing, and I for one feel like we can get. I
agree.
I can commit the time to get through over the next few weeks the rest of these policies, and it's a it's a lot of pages, but I feel like it's manageable for myself, and if everybody agrees that we can push through these and then get to the point where we are getting Dr. McKinnon and Dr. Pearson-Ugel's input on, to your point, John, what stays, what goes in the existing book, we will each, we're in a good place for a first reading,
right?
Because we will have the policy outlines really as to the rubric, what's staying, going, and being modified.
I agree. I am finding it so much easier to go through these policies than the CABE policies. It's really remarkable because I was maybe spending an hour and a half to 2 hours to get through 60 pages, and this is taking 30 to 45 minutes. So, I'm looking at where I think there is a huge advantage in us sort of getting this over with by mid-May, and then being able to, not have to meet every week to discuss policy, and to be really done with this process by May would be remarkable. So, that's why I'm it looks like it's about 120 to 150, 155 pages the last week. Let me share my screen just to.
That's the math I did when I looked through it. I felt
Cool.
like if we doubled up on what we did the past week, if we
Yep.
double our homework, we can get it done and get it to Dr. McKinnon in time to give him time to then make, for his input as to the existing policies.
Right. So that, I mean, so the 318, these were all the policies reviewed this last week. That would mean that for 325, and so that leaves us with the remaining 680 pages. So that would mean if we divide that, for the next basically 5 weeks or so, for these would be the 325, that's 148 pages.
Mm-hmm.
These would be the April 1st, that's 128 pages. These would be the April 8th. And I know, Sarah, you had a conflict on April 8th, right? So I don't know if, you would still have quorum, so someone else could chair that meeting, or we could not meet, but still understand that when we leave the April 1st meeting that, this is sort of what's ahead of us just throughout the week to review.
Hey, John, just as a thought on this calendar,
Yeah.
if we're trying to assign a target end date, I think we probably need to be realistic and talk about whether or not we need to also block in a longer evening meeting at some point, because we're not going to be able to meet this pace. It's possible to read all of these in a week, but it will absolutely not be possible to discuss all of these in a week.
Yeah, and that's actually the part that I wanted to test today. So I was hoping that we could shift to,
and that's why for a couple of weeks
step
I've
of
been
the
saying, can we try to practice, because that'll tell us more about timing than how much can I read in a week. I can read the whole book in a week, but it's not going to get us through the process.
Yeah, agreed.
And I would add, though, some of these page numbers, as you pointed out before, are not policy. They're other things.
That's right.
So it won't be, in
Right.
theory, this many pages of policy.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. Just I'm assuming the same rate of inaccuracy with the page counts of sort of policy versus regulation, but there may be an overwhelming, number. This 31 pages may be 10 pages of policy, and in other places it's just one page.
And frankly, the FERPA policy is going to be straight law, and there's nothing we're going to change. But the policy about dress code might be 3 lines, and we might spend an hour figuring out how to make it better.
Right.
And I did notice some of these policies that, for example, are listed as a large number of pages, but in some cases it's a local board and then a regional board. So it's 2 versions of the same policy.
That's right. And a little bit of what comes with that, I think the math of this, where we have regulation or where we have sort of regional variations, I think we also sort of large pages, this page counts that add to that. I think we also have complexity in discussion. And so that can help to sort of carve up this, not just in terms of the pages to review, but also the pages to discuss. Because if possible, and it may not be the case, but if possible, where sort of the adoption of language that could be used at the regional level could be used at our level, but not vice versa, then like that we could make that recommendation.
And that's true of at least one of the policies we reviewed this week. That there's an easy way to reconcile them.
Right.
But before we kind of drill into this, I just wanted to kind of address a couple of points that came up in the discussion about the process. The first is that I strongly object to the idea that we should end this process with 3 policy books. And I strongly object because in 1997, the 3 boards adopted uniform policies in 3 separate books. And they have gone in 3 different directions over the course of 25 years. Because the 3 different boards have taken at different times different levels of interest in making sure they're compliant with the law. And now we have 3 different levels of compliance across the 3 different boards, and it's a hornet's nest. And it creates an unworkable situation for administration who, when they're presented with a question like, hey, somebody came with a gift to the board, they want to donate a piano. Instead of saying, well, the process is this, they've got to say, oh, well, the person lives in Easton. Are they trying to donate it to Helen Keller or to Joel Barlow? Oh, which board is it? Which policy is it? Who do I have to tell and why? And when you repeat that process literally hundreds of times, you're creating inefficiencies. And that's without getting into questions about whether or not we have things like conflicting Title IX policies that have different processes and procedures around how to comply with legal requirements.
Mm.
So, we have said in this committee for 2 years that the goal is a single policy book that has a crosswalk and a preface that explains what to do. When it says principal, it means head of school. When you don't have a pool, obviously we get you don't have a pool, but the core substance has to be uniform, and it has to be in a single book so that it is more restrictive, or there is pause given in the future for boards to say, hey, I'm personally concerned about the dress code policy here in Easton or Reading or Region 9. Let's change it. There needs to be a presumption that the 3 boards collaborate before any one board does that. Otherwise, we get right back where we are right now, which is a nightmare.
Hmm.
And when it comes to timing and saying there's an urgency to get this done in April, that rubs me the wrong way a little bit for a couple reasons. I want to get this thing done. I've wanted to get this thing done for 2 years. Trust me. But the reality is we're sitting here on March 18th, still having a conversation about the process for reviewing policies. And the reason we're having the conversation about the process for reviewing policies 4 months after the board's turned over is because the Region 9 board has deliberately stalled the process time and time again. And they passed a motion that creates further complexity and further confusion as to what's going on. And we would be 4 months into a 3-month process by now if we had just gotten to work in December instead of fighting about appointments, fighting about whether we had 1 committee, 2 committees, 7 committees, or 8 committees. There is a overwhelming need, desire, and expectation that we fix the policy problem. It is a board governance obligation to fix the policy problem. And it is inappropriate to say, just tell the superintendent to do it. It's the board has the obligation of adopting policy. The board doesn't have the obligation of asking the superintendent how many staples are in a stapler, but plenty of board members are comfortable doing that. So we need to figure out what our priorities are, remind ourselves what our obligations are, and focus on doing the work of adopting policies that don't put future boards in the same quandary that we're in right now. And so I would like nothing more than to get into the 1000s, the 2000s, figure out how this group is going to work through these shipment and Goodwin policies and start making some recommendations, because I guarantee we will have long knockdown, drag out fights about things like the transfer policy and the purchasing policy when we get there, because I know that among the 21 people on 3 boards, there are very different views about what those are. So let's work through the low hanging fruit, identify the pressure points, and see how effective we can be before we set any sort of optimistic deadlines about April anything, because having sat through this for CABE, I'd love it if we got there, but I'm just not super optimistic that that's going to happen.
Yeah, the path that I see, and the reason why I think this could work, is based on the recommendation from Dr. McKinnon, and what his recommendation. I want to be really clear, because if someone else has a different read on this, please sort of speak now. His recommendation is, yes, you review all of these, but ideally you're not wordsmithing, except if you really, really have to. And I think there are a couple of places where we might really, really have to. But that you are adopting all of the shipment policies, repealing all of the existing policies for each of the 3 boards, and then after that, engaging in a process of review of the old policies to say which ones should be revived.
I think that I agree with that. I think that my concern is, and it triggered last night when I was reading the transfer policy in particular. The transfer policy has been a sticking point for a lot of people across the 3 boards, even in the last year.
Yeah.
People have different ideas of what the transfer policy is and have different levels of expectation about degrees of discretion. The transfer policy that is the model policy for Shipman and Goodwin is not the customer practice of any of the 3 boards, to my understanding.
Right.
And if we're going to just recommend that, there's one of 2 things is going to happen. Either it's going to go to the tri-board and all hell's going to break loose because I'm going to fight about it, or it's just going to get adopted because nobody reads. And then somebody's going to complain that a transfer wasn't handled appropriately.
And that's
even though they didn't read the new policy.
And that's why I want to try to bring this to my board mid-April, because I think it is, like, first, I'm the only one from my board who's thinking about policy with any regularity. I'm not crazy about the last 4 months and how various things happen. I don't think it was the right thing. I don't think that was honest and transparent, whatever. But we have 3 members from the Region 9 board who are here, who are deeply paying attention. And I think the rest of that board is committed to, we're going to read all those policies. And when I just sit and go, I realize I need to get my board to care about these policies in that way. In a perfect world, I would have somebody here every Friday, not just me, from my board. And then when I come to April, I would have an enthusiastic board going, we're ready to go through and read all these policies. So I agree that, sort of a tri-board where we introduce these ideas to the boards for the first time would be pandemonium, would be craziness. I mean, whether it's the gifting policy or the transfers or the, I saw a lot of landmines in here. But I have a sort of renewed energy for getting my board to care about policy, to pay attention to this specific exercise, and to sort of start reading through here. But I think we need that, that little sort of overview that Dr. McKinnon mentioned that the sort of the shipment attorney would provide to help everyone understand, here is the danger you put yourself in when you create unnecessary policy. Here's that, right? If that person can do an effective presentation that will be persuasive for board members, I hate to say it, but we may have to have that conversation 3 times. I may have to have that attorney come to an April meeting for my board and sort of have that conversation, and for us to be able to discuss and debate and sort of get everyone on side ahead of that tri-board meeting. And I think every board really needs to do that.
And that presentation needs to include, that presentation needs to include an additional spin, which is not just that unnecessary policies create liability, but that mismatched policies create liability.
Yeah.
Which is a unique circumstance for our administrators, right? That there could be times when they are put in a conflicting position where they have an employee who is joint and they're told to do 2 opposite things.
Right. Yeah.
For the sake of moving things forward, do you mind if I step back for a second and then take us forward?
Please.
Kathy, I just wanted to acknowledge that I think what you experienced this last week was confusion by the people who haven't been in these meetings, maybe some fear regarding they don't know what it looks like. They hadn't seen the new model policies yet. They have now been granted access. I shared everything yesterday with our entire team, so they can begin reviewing just like we have done. But I also think part of what this last week was for us, from last Friday to this Friday morning, was taking a dive and seeing what these look like ourselves, and I didn't have any preconceived notions. I didn't know what I was going to be getting into with them. And I was pleasantly surprised. These are clear, they're straightforward. This is wonderful. Like, I've seen a lot of legal documents before. These were as good as they get, right? So I was pleasantly surprised. And it was unfortunate that people didn't trust us in this process. But I think we are in alignment that we're just here to review, go through this exercise, and make sure that the rubric that Jason gave us is working for us. So that's what I did over this last week. We talked about adoption, rejection, and revising the policies, right? So I read through, not making a decision about what I wanted to do, but I read through and thought, yes, these 3 options are going to work. With what I am seeing so far, I feel good. I feel confident that we can move forward through our motion as we stated. And I think that this rubric will work. But I was also looking to see if anyone else had feedback or thoughts, because when we first got the original rubric from Jason from the old school, he used the words instead, adopt, repeal, and to be maintained. So they had adjusted a little bit from that first discussion when we first made our motion. So I really was coming at it this week saying, is this going to work for us? Do I think this is the best way forward? And yes, I do. The one thing that I had thought about was when Jason was talking at this last meeting, he said, the boards are going to have to decide if they are comfortable dropping certain policies that they have had all this time that are no longer necessary. are they going to be willing to shed them and just let them go? And so that was something I wanted to think about, and I came back to it, and I think that that's a good point, and I would like for us to discuss that. Do we need a fourth option in the rubric? Or do some of these policies that we could shed, do they fall into the reject? So I was hoping to bring that to Jason today, but we can make note of that and you know, send that over to him. Because right, some of those policies from 1997, and I can't think of one off the top of my head right now, we may not need it moving forward. And so what I would like to see, as I go back to that example rubric that he used from Oxford, he had an Appendix A, current board policies that can be reviewed. Appendix B, policies, proposed policies that can be reviewed. And like he linked to them so that way all of the boards could see the chunk of policies that go into each bucket. So what I would like to see between now and mid-April, or that date in April that we agree upon, whatever, is a possibility for an Appendix D. And those are the policies that maybe we drop or shed and let go of. So I think once we have that instruction from him and he groups those together for us, our board will feel better, because that's what they were waiting for. That's what they were looking for. I just don't think we were there yet. The cart was before the horse. We hadn't even seen, we didn't know what we were looking at yet. We hadn't even thought and processed. Now that we have, a week later, I feel comfortable saying to Dr. McKinnon, if you could work on what your recommendations are, putting those appendixes together so we can lump and group the old policies, the new policies, we know what to review, we know what to bring to our boards. This would be great. If you could do that between now and the April date, that will make everyone happy. Okay, so moving on from there, I don't know how everyone feels from Easton and Reading, but when I was looking at the bulk of these and the fact that we may have 120 to 150 pages to review, you know, the Region 9 Policy Committee has a different schedule. We have been meeting with you concurrently, but something we may want to consider is, instead of meeting every single Friday, we may want to just come back together April 1st and April 22nd. And in those weeks in between, we are reading, we are reviewing the policies, we are going through that Excel sheet and we're checking it off that we've gone through, and continuing to make our notes. But maybe Region 9 uses that time, instead of meeting those Friday mornings, we're using that time to read, to get up to date, to move this process forward like that. So that's something to consider too.
And that's the prerogative, right? Sort of separate entities. That's certainly the prerogative, you know, sort of your choice to make. The reason why, and we're still not into the actual meat of the conversation. So what this meeting is supposed to be is not continued discussion about the process, you know, at ad nauseum, right? It's supposed to be us going through sort of that week's worth of policies and sort of discussing our notes. 2 weeks worth, I suspect, is going to be more than an hour's worth of conversation, and may be difficult for people to carve out. You know, it's difficult for me to carve out for one. It's also a function of just basic good project management governance, right? It is sort of as an accountability lever and sort of accountability partnership here that we have amongst all the committee members, to say, here's a chunk of sort of, you know, sort of policies that we're going to go through that I know I have to get done by 9 o'clock Friday morning. When you double that, you double the opportunity to sort of get off track. And so, you know, it's just this is basic project management stuff that, you know, I've learned 20 plus years, you know, working at in corporate America. It's helpful if you have a sort of a more regular checkpoint.
Can we please start the 1000s?
Yeah.
So that we can all figure out what this process actually looks like, because I think that's way more valuable than guessing.
Yeah. Yeah. Does that seem reasonable that we move on to B?
Yes,
Okay.
it does to me. So
Okay.
is the thought that we'll pull up the policy one at a time? Or are you going to share your screen, John?
I can share the screen, but I think people should feel she'll feel fine about actually going in on their own as well if they wish. So these are all in the same order that they're represented on the spreadsheet. And the idea is not that we're sitting here now reading through this, but that we've taken the opportunity to make notes. And so this should just be a function of us sort of resolving, not necessarily clicking the check mark, but sort of talking about each one of the notes here. So Kathy, you're right. And I think people can speak for themselves. So if we just want to go in order.
I just made a note for myself and others that we don't currently have this in Region 9. That's just so we're aware.
Yep.
Right. And that's probably because the statute on AEDs came in after 1997.
Yeah. Okay. And then process in place to ensure.
Sorry, go ahead.
Kathy, you have this one here, the process in place?
Well, it was just a note that when the policy says that there will be there's personnel trained in the operation of these AEDs at all times, there needs to be, I guess that comes to a regulation potentially. I'm just a note that we shouldn't have it in the policy then if we don't actually are not able to enforce it.
We need the policy because it's in the statute.
Yeah, and I think the function of this being in the policy is a function of it's required by law. And the fact that there is no existing policy on this, I don't find one for Easton either, means we don't have a policy articulating that we will be compliant with law. And that doesn't mean that we're not compliant with law, but the policy is what makes sure that it's clear to everyone that we will be. And so we should be. I think what you highlighted here also, Kathy, would go into the category of maybe EDD, right? Which is the enumerated duties document. So anytime we see the superintendent shall, or the superintendent or their designee, or the board shall, or we should just tag it as EDD, and then we can go through later and grab all of those items.
All right. And there may be a policy in place. I just don't know. Okay. So that was that note.
I didn't find a policy in Easton for this. So
John, this is the first one we're doing. Do we want to take a motion to recommend that it be treated as adopt? How are we doing this on an individual basis? Yeah,
so I thought sort of the joint committee would do that, that we either adopt, reject, or revise. So
I would move we recommend adopt on the AED policy.
I second that. All in favor for the joint? Aye. Our recommendation is to adopt.
Do we have to do it separately then, is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I see. Okay. Do we have a motion to move forward with this 100 series automatic external defibrillators?
So moved.
I'll second.
Okay.
I think you would look for discussion. I guess we didn't do discussion.
Yeah, do we have a discussion? I'm sorry, Kathy. Did you want to discuss any more of your notes there, or?
No.
Okay, and so the motion is to adopt.
Okay, and is that the vote? Did everyone voted on that?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
And John, I updated.
I see that. That's great. So and so maybe we start each one of these with motion to adopt the sort of the policy, deadly weapons or firearms, and then we're going into discussion. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Chris?
Yes.
Like the default posture being that the motion to adopt, and then it can fail or not.
I'm trying to think about a more
efficient,
omnibus way to do it, to say to adopt the 1,000 series, but I don't think we're going to get all the way through that today. So for the purpose of right now, I'll move that we adopt the deadly weapons policy, or recommend the adoption of the deadly weapons policy.
Okay, I second that motion and move us to discussion. And I think you could do the same for Region 9. Sarah?
Sorry, I was thinking as well. I don't mean to slow this down, but a part of me is wondering, is this the best way forward for us to do this one by one? Or do we just make notes of the ones that we have concerns with and just discuss the concerns?
Well, I think we open up the policy, we show it on the screen, and then we see what if we try this process for 2 or 3 of these, and then we say, you know what, we could do a bunch of these at a time. If that, if it's better.
I mean, it might be possible possible to say that we are discussing the adoption of all the 1000 series, and then we can discuss them. And even if the motion gets tabled for a week, we come back to it and we keep revising until we've adopted the 1000s in a tranche.
That's interesting. So motion to adopt.
Motion to adopt the 1000 series model policies appearing on lines 4 through 15 of the spreadsheet.
Seconded. And then we can move to discussion of that series and
Right,
come
and then
back
we can
and
make
check
whatever
each one.
amendments to that motion we need to.
I like that. Yeah, that's very good.
So, or it could be tabled.
Right.
Is
I think
that-
it will be tabled in about 15 minutes and picked up
Okay.
next week.
Right, okay.
So does someone want to make that same motion? And you can just say same motion in Region 9.
So move.
Okay, same
Yeah.
motion. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Good. So now we're in discussion, and so we'll go through. So
I have a practical question. So the net new policy, John, those columns O through Q, what's the intention of that?
to indicate if there is an absence of this policy in existing
Oh, got it.
manuals.
So in lieu of, say, Kathy's note and I think some of the other policies which we flag. Okay, got it.
No, in addition to, I think she was using the checkbox, and then somebody had indicated the sort of where there were sort of crossovers with existing policy as well in a separate column.
That was me. That was just my notes to myself.
Right.
And I said, no policy found, because there may be one that I didn't
Sure.
find. So it's not a declarative 100%
Right.
guarantee.
Got it.
Yeah. I do not see any notes here except for, sort of administrative here related to, hey, use the right school instead,
So this, I think, gets to Chris's comment earlier around one manual, which I think that's a separate discussion
Separate
ultimately. But so, for example, we wouldn't say, we don't have an elementary school, we just have a school.
Right.
So that's that.
Right.
note.
Right. You will kill
Right.
yourself wordsmithing if
Yeah.
you go through that exercise.
Right. It becomes
But so this was my thinking, because I appreciate that comment. However, in a Region 9 policy handbook, if I'm a Region 9 parent, for example, reading the policies, and I read this policy and it says the district's elementary and secondary schools, that's confusing to me, because we don't have
Yeah.
an elementary school and we don't have schools. And I hear what you're saying, Chris, but in the context of a Region 9 family or person, it's potentially confusing as to what district, because that's not mine. It seems like a error.
I think the intent would be that we have a preface to the policy manual that states, that sort of accounts for that, and make sure that people are not confused by that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I understand, I was trying to understand Chris's comment and Kathy, with respect to your question. I mean, and I'm putting my parent hat on, right? A parent of siblings that could potentially go to 3 different schools across 3 different districts, right? And so, and I think we can probably accomplish what people's tactical opinions are of the same thing, meaning, so I'm envisioning Easton Reading Region 9 introductory, I'm making this up,
Right.
20
That's right.
pages that says, for this and all 500 pages that follow it, these are 3 separate districts
Right.
that have aligned policies and key definitions. Leader of the school could mean head of school at Barlow,
Right.
principal in the K through 8s, and then that becomes an overarching document that there's almost like an introduction, table of contents, index.
It's policy 0.9, basically.
Right. So in substance, it's a single compilation of documents, if you will, but ultimately that are pegged to 3 separate legal districts.
Right.
And at the end of the day, it's substantively the same thing. It's more of 6 of one, half a dozen the other, in my opinion, but we will have to get to recognize everybody's comments. We'll have to get our respective boards through that to really understand that, but not in the context of process, but more in the context of what Jason has identified to me, which is a central concern. If I'm a parent with 3 kids in 3 different
Right.
buildings with 3 different districts, I want to know that the bus policy is the same. I want to know that the safety policy is the same, because that to me is even more confusing than,
Right.
oh, I'm a parent. But if we have a clear preface as to, to your point, Kathy, I'm definitely acknowledging your point, right, as well, that I think this solution might get us there. And then again, substantively, we're at the same place. So I mean, I think it's great to flag the head of school inconsistencies, and I had an administrative
Yes.
one, like a shipman title.
Yes.
That stuff I think can get defined in this preface, if you will, that would have the key definitions as it pertains to each district. So that would be my proposed solution with respect to this. And then, but I think it's great to flag, and then at least we can, when we compile all of this at the end of the day, we can actually make sure that it's complete in that preface.
So how would something be handled that couldn't be handled in the preface, that is specific to one district or school? Because I think then I understand, principal versus head of school is simple,
Right.
but there will be instances where it is not simple, and there will be a policy or policies that do not apply to some schools. And I don't think don't
That's where our
have
legal
one.
counsel comes into play.
That's right.
I think that's where the legal representation comes in. They
Right.
make their best recommendation
Yeah,
to us.
I think during the process conversation, I think that the point that I was trying to make is we need to rely on Dr. McKinnon, Dr. Pearson-Ugal, and our legal counsel to help us determine whether or not there's a necessary split. Or we can handle it with sort of the preface, or if it's fine that it says, here's our pool policy, and we don't have an aquatics program.
If there's
Like,
a
it doesn't
policy
matter.
there's a policy on preschool tuition that is never going to apply to the high school. You
Right.
can either say, we're just adopting it because it creates ER9 consistency,
Right.
or you can put in the preface basically a table that says the following policies apply only to Easton and Reading. The following policies apply only to Region 9.
Yeah.
And accept it that way, because
Right.
I keep coming back to 3 books is an invitation for a nightmare.
So it could be one book with a reference that calls out, hey, here are the things that, where they only apply to this. So it's sort of one document, but can be, but again, that approach, we need Shipman to say yes, and we need Dr. McKinnon to say, yeah, that makes sense.
And the strong presumption should be that we are not making those exceptions. Those exceptions should absolutely be the rarity.
Right.
I do not say this to derail this process in any way. However, I think this is going to be, I think the Region 9 committee needs to meet individually, separately, and really talk this through, because I see potentially considerable pushback when we go back to the Region 9 board and talk about this. Because, for example, the mask policy that was just revoked and discussed, Region 9 took it to first reading, Easton and Reading did not. In the scenario that is being laid out here, as I understand it, with one policy book, how would those things work? Because each board is still voting independently, and
Correct.
that would, so with Region 9 votes to one thing or Easton votes for one thing,
Agreed.
then our book gets jumbled anyway.
Kathy, I agree, and I actually think that could be included in an index that says, this policy has 2 different versions. This policy has 3 different versions. Ultimately, having it all, it's really a sort of semantic thing that I don't think we need to continue to debate, because 3 manuals that you shuffle together the pages, and then where the policies are identical, you deduplicate those, is the same thing as what we're talking about here. I completely agree with you. We are 3 separate autonomous boards with the ability to determine our own individual policies. I think what we're trying to do is move forward in a sort of spirit of cooperation as much as possible to improve the experience for our citizens of our two towns, so
Mhm.
that if you've got a kid at the elementary, the middle, and the high school, you're not having to go through two separate manuals. And for the people who have to actually go execute this policy, some of it can have pretty significant, sort of liability to our towns if it's not executed properly. And so I think there's a huge advantage, but I completely recognize, and I, for one, am not at all interested in giving up the autonomy of the Easton board. If we can do this in a way where we maintain our autonomy and can make the experience better for our citizens and our administrators, I think that's the win-win that we're trying to go for here.
I think I won't speak for Sarah or Cheryl, but I get the sense that we are going to have to really have a discussion with the Region 9
Yeah.
board about this approach.
I think that's right.
I think we really, this is going to be something will more significant discussion, because I don't think everybody's there.
Yeah,
Right.
I think you're right. I think that's the same for all three boards, but I also think it is exactly what Dr. McKinnon has been saying. It is what Dr. Harrison said. It is what Dr. McMorrin said. Is like, I think this goes back to the beginning of sort of this arrangement, is that there was a desire. And I think in 1997 there was an attempt to do that. They did this, but the specifics of how that was done led to the new, sort of the problem that we have now, or allowed the problem to occur again. So anyways, if we can
So
stay
focus on our task here.
on this task for now, and then we can come out, we can continue to have this discussion. Region 9 can meet separately. Like, there's all kinds of opportunities there. Okay, so
I have a lot of comments that were specific to Region 9, which we can table, that we don't have to go into those details. But this one I did think was more substantive, and it was currently the Region 9 policy includes realistic replicas and dangerous instruments of any kind, which at the bottom of this policy, there was language that if you wanted to expand this definition of deadly weapons and firearms to seek legal counsel. I raised this because I think this was probably added for a reason, and I didn't want it to go unnoticed, because you see stories about this in the news. Somebody had a pretend gun and there were issues. I raised that.
Yeah, I think we have, I don't know if John and Sarah, you guys want to keep the time, but there were a few, I would table that one as well, but there are a few, I'm looking at the 1000 series that perhaps we don't need to table. We could just, as two joint committees, just move forward with them, kind of adopt. Green cleaning programs is one of them, because I think the and pesticide application on school property. The pool one, I had a couple minor substantive questions. I agree with Kathy on firearms. I'd want to table that one, but maybe we can at least move toward putting in the adopt column, a couple of these.
I don't know about the pesticide application, because I don't know if we have an integrated pest control management plan.
No, that's fair. That's fair.
I mean, my only comment that was the on the green cleaning program was, there was a statement number 4 that said no parent, guardian, teacher, or staff member may bring into the school facility any consumer product which is intended to clean, deodorize, sanitize, or disinfect. And that's very, very broad. Does that mean a teacher can't bring in hand sanitizer or wipes for their school, for example? And maybe I'm reading it too closely, but to me, that teachers bring those in all the time. And would that prohibit them technically by policy? And then my other question was, students are not mentioned. So can students bring in hand sanitizer, wipes, that sort of thing?
Kathy, that's a great point to that. I'd say I would look to the revision date of 7/5/2021, which is post-COVID, if you will, or during COVID. And I think with edits such as that, there's definitely the opportunity, as each board goes to one of their or the boards for first reading, to get those type of tactical edits there, unless Chris and John have any objection. This might lead to some kind of deviation of wording.
Well, I think it would, and it strikes me that we need the conversation with the shipment attorney here first,
Okay.
because I think she's gonna help us to build out our model and understanding of this in a way that I think is going to be really important to our conversations, because I think, Cheryl, what you pointed out is exactly the point. Is this was updated recently, and it's a function of law.
So
Just for context, Connecticut General Statutes 10-231G says that on or before July 11th, 2011, so we're right on time, each local or regional Board of Education shall implement a green cleaning program for the cleaning and maintenance of the school buildings and facilities in its district. No person shall use a cleaning product inside a school unless such cleaning product meets the guidelines or environmental standards set by a national or international environmental certification program approved by the DAS in consultation with the Commissioner of Energy and Environmental Protection. Such cleaning products shall, to the maximum extent possible, minimize the harmful effects to the human health and environment.
Yeah, I think that is the clearest articulation of that's the posture we should have towards these. I think Shipman has done an excellent job of making sure that these policies are concise and specifically in support of required, sort of required by law. You got to have a policy, you got to have a program. And so I don't think that we're going to find ourselves doing a lot of wordsmithing. I think we're going to find ourselves saying, oh, we also need to do that.
So I guess to that, as far as future agenda items, I do agree with Sarah. Like, me personally, I would love to have a couple of weeks with, and again, I think we should still have meetings in the calendar per se, but just to get through them, because I'd like to be able to efficiently go through adopt, repeal, replace. But perhaps for the next dual committee meetings, we can have Gwen meet this group first, so that maybe that can help us resolve what I'm going to call the more detailed edits, which are valid, right? And that will then open up a discussion on, okay, to Sarah's point about the bucket D, if you will, how do we resolve getting rid of something we've had for 25 years, right? So maybe it's helpful to flip the timing of that, so we don't get stuck in the process discussion every time we try to move a particular policy.
So perhaps we can look at the calendar. If it works for people to meet on the 25th, that we would have reviewed, let's see, so purchasing through hiring of certified staff, and we invite Gwen, or are we saying sort of cease and desist, don't make additional sort of reviews at this point, let's just have Gwen come in and we talk about what we've done so far?
We're currently at a pace where it's going to take 3 months to review the 1000s. So
it's not though. It's not. I
don't think it is.
It's like 3 to 4 minutes per subject, and she may turn that into 30 seconds per subject, depending on what the guidance is.
Here's what I'm proposing, and let me all think. So we all get through, we keep reading. And we just go through our, John, it sounds like you're going to bring it to Easton in April, Sarah, Kathy and I are going to bring it to Region 9 in April. Chris, I'll defer to you on what you want to do for Reading. We don't have to get into policy discussion, but we're all agreeing to have that first reading or first blush, if you will, at our separate respective board meetings, right? And then hopefully we'll get to a point where we can all get to consensus, and then the contentious or things where it requires debate, that's what we bring to the tri-boards. Because then we'll give us all time to figure out what our boards are truly comfortable with from a detailed perspective without getting into the weeds. We could keep reading, and then maybe the next meeting we start with Gwen, and then we say, okay, Gwen, now that we think we get it, what do we do with this 1000 thing? Help us understand how we can navigate this.
Right. Yeah. And I think she hangs in there with us as we have that discussion and can help us, nudge us like, oh, hold on, or.
Right.
Yeah.
So is there a cost associated with having Gwen that we need to have be approved, that we need to get approved?
No. We do not need to have it approved because it's, a certain reasonable amount, but there is a cost. So we don't want to be, belligerent about it.
So just so I understand, so does the cost, is it split between the 3 boards, or?
I think it would be.
Okay, but there's no motion or approvals required to have her come in.
Kathy, as
And
I think my
approve
understanding
the
from
money.
from a Region 9, as long as it's within the budget that year that we're currently in, we can defer to the administration to
Right.
determine if there's adequate funding for each board's respective share of that fee. To the extent that they can't, then and it's beyond the transfer limit that each board has, then that's where it would show up on that transfer report when we have the monthly meetings. And then the administration can and should make that, should apply the discretion.
The board does not need to allocate every use of council. It happens every day.
Yep.
Right.
Okay, I'm just asking because I don't know, so.
Yep.
I just want to make sure.
Okay. So that would mean that we're targeting to get through hiring of certified staff to read and review, and then we will hope to start. We'll consult with Dr. McKinnon to make sure that he agrees with that direction, and if we can invite a representative from Shipman and Goodwin to kick off our conversation next week.
And Cheryl and Sarah, I would ask, I think can we meet as a Region 9 policy committee individually and talk through some of these things? Because I foresee issues that we should talk through.
Sure, that sounds fine. Okay,
And-
so
and just
we'll
for-
figure
for-
out a schedule.
For our purposes, from the Reading perspective, if this is going to turn into the latest sort of Region 9 demanding to do its own thing circumstance, then I would be prepared to move Reading forward with adopting the shipment policies and just getting on with our lives.
That's my posture as well. I don't know that my board is aligned, and I think you're in the same position, but at a minimum, Reading and Easton boards can probably sort of complete this process on the timeline. And I really think it's important that Region 9 is along with us, but if that doesn't work out, then, I think at a minimum, we will have updated to Shipman.
We're comfortable doing the work, getting it approved, and if y'all want to come along for the ride, great. And if you don't, that's fine too.
No, I think everybody's aligned with Shipman and Goodwin and is completely in that camp and is aligned with the timing. I think the issue will be one book. And I think we have to talk that through and make sure that I think we need to talk that through. I think that will be, it's not Shipman and Goodwin, it's not the timing, it's the one policy handbook.
And this is where we have 21 people who need to better understand that we have a codependent relationship, much more so than an independent relationship. And every time on every issue, and for 5 years, it comes up 3 times a year, one of the boards says, the hell with you, we can do whatever we want. It doesn't help the greater good of Easton, Reading, and Region 9. And newsflash, it chases administrators and good people from the district.
I'm
Debating that.
stating, I'm not going to go down that.
And don't take this
path.
as a personal anything.
Yeah.
This is a reflection on a process, a system, and a circumstance.
Right.
Yeah,
I'm
and just the history of it.
to make this productive and meaningful for our Region 9 board, I think we need to talk this through and be very clear and get everybody to the same place so that we have a clear path forward. Because for us to spin our wheels, if we're not going to have Region 9 approval, is not a good use of anybody's time, administration as well. That's just, I just think we need to have the discussion.
I totally agree with that, Kathy. And I think it's that point, the sort of single, manual. And I think there are actually some, sort of creative ways to sort of get to the main goal of that without people feeling like they're ceding any, autonomy. I think the other issue that will be really, complex will be the sort of wholesale adoption, which is, that has been the recommendation from Dr. McKinnon is adopt all these and then come back to revive. Don't keep any of the existing, just revive ones on a sort of targeted basis as an intentional thing. I think that's going to be controversial amongst all 3 boards. I think people are going to go, wait a second, what about this one? Let's hold this one. And maybe the outcome is, okay, we end up holding these 5 or these 6 or these 7. And then, but the rest we let go of. But I think that's going to be really controversial, and there's going to be a lot. 21 members all sort of having conversations.
Mhm.
Sarah, I have to drop. So,
Yep.
but I'm committed to a joint process to be that's intended to be productive. So happy to.
I want this to be productive for everybody. I mean, I think we all agree that the goal is to have great policies that work for the schools, but also for the administration, so that it's not
Right.
a burden of time and energy and confusion.
Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you.
Well,
The
I'm
past
happy to
4
move to
months are
adjourn.
a tremendous, the past 4 months are a tremendous argument for regionalization.
All right. So, any committee member comment from joint?
That was my committee member.
Okay, very good.
I'm happy to move to adjourn for Region 9.
Second, bye.
Motion to adjourn.
10,
I move that the
11.
Meeting be adjourned at 10:11.
Thank you. We are adjourned at 10:11. Thanks,
Have
everybody.
a nice weekend, you
Thanks
guys.
all.
Thank you. You too.
Take care.
Thanks.